Hello, everyone. This is Carol Dimitrov with OPA Community Outreach, and I'm extremely pleased to have Frank Clifford visiting us today. He is going to be talking about solar arc directions in action. Solar arcs prove highly accurate in forecasting work as they reflect the major changes and landmark and times in our lives. They are becoming a very popular method of forecasting because they are simple to spot and easy to interpret. Frank has taught this method in 15 countries for over 15 years. And in today's talk, he will use the charts of audience members to show how solar arcs can be an invaluable part of our astrology toolkit. And then just a little bit about Frank. I know many of you are familiar with him already and his work, but he has built an eclectic practice, 30 years career in writing. He's written over a dozen books, a consultant astrologer, a palmist, a publisher, editor, a researcher of birth data, and the principal of the London School of Astrology. Frank has written for the Mountain Astrologer since 2008 and guest edited the magazine a number of times. His most recent books are the Solar Arc Handbook and the Book of Music Horoscopes. In 2012, he was the youngest recipient of a lifetime honor from the Astrological Association for his contribution to astrology. He's also received a writing award from ISAR, and he was a nominee for the Regulus Award at one of the recent UACs. So a little bit about Frank, and you can visit and find out more about Frank at www.frankclifford.co.uk and also the London School of Astrology.co.uk, and those links are provided on your email. So with that being said, thank you so much, Frank. It's all
Thank you,
yours.
Carol. Thank you. Thanks very much. And hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thanks for giving up an hour of your time on Sunday for this presentation. Carol mentioned that if I put the camera on for too long, it might upset the recording or something. So I'm not even sure you can see me. But anyway, I might turn that off in a moment. But yes, thank you for the lovely introduction, Carol. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you all being here today. On the right, you'll see the book that I've just written, which gives you a lot of different examples of solar arc, and you can always email me your details, email me your stories if you wish, and I'll read them on a train somewhere. I'm always traveling, so feel very welcome to keep in touch. Okay, let's make a start. I'm going to show you how to do solar arc directions. It's pretty simple. I'm an Aries, so I love to be able to do something quick, fast, easy, simple. I always joke when I'm lecturing that it was an Aries who shouted, Lord, give me patience, but hurry. And that's me when it comes to my tools. I want something that works quickly, easily, and then I can go deep and I can explore in a profound, hopefully profound or deep way. But the method I prefer to be simple, straightforward. So I'm going to show you different let's have a look. Here we go. Different considerations before we start. The key things that you'll need to understand solar arc. I'm going to show you a few examples, but I really want to get to your examples. And as I said a little bit earlier, before we started, that if you sent me, I've got about half a dozen people who have sent me charts. I'm going to try and do as many of those as possible, probably 8 to 10 minutes each person, maybe a little bit less. And if you're online, let me know and we'll go ahead with that. All right, just a couple of considerations before we go any further. I don't really do prediction. I don't do fortune telling. I do forecasting. So it's really about looking at the season that somebody's in and being able to give them helpful, constructive guidelines of how best to use that season. So instead, when I look at the solar arc direction or a transit or any other forecasting method, I tend to just use transits and directions. I don't often use progressions. When I look at that a method, I always think about the process that somebody's going through rather than trying to predict or anticipate an event. And really, with a transit or a direction, we should be asking not what's going to happen, but how would the client, the student, get involved in making something happen at that particular time, rather than just predicting something. So we're always being asked to learn or experience something with a transit or a direction, rather than trying to make a prediction. I'd much rather the client leave the session clear about where they're at and an idea of the best times to do what they want to do in their lives in the coming year, rather than feel threatened, anxious, upset about something that is going to happen. If we've got context, we can have a dialogue and we can help the client co-create. Often, as I say, I want the client to go away feeling empowered, and I'm always going to encourage a level of self-determination, a sense of them feeling like they're in the driver's seat. We know that life is complex and people around us do crazy things, make decisions that we wouldn't make. And so really all we can do is to take care of ourselves, says the Aries, and to ensure that what we're going through transit-wise and in our lives, we can find some sort of meaning and understanding the process of what we're being asked to learn, to take on board. Often I ask, what happened last time? With a Jupiter transit, I'll say, what was going on 12 years ago? Get them to connect with something in the past. They're obviously quite a bit older now, but with a particular transit or direction, you can say, well, actually, what happened the last time? Connected. Get them thinking about the choices they made and didn't make the previous time something happened. I'm also keen, when I'm looking at a direction or a transit, is to find out who or what that planet is in that person's life. For instance, if you've got a Uranus direction or transit, normally I want to know what is Saturnian in that person's life. What has become rigid? What's become so predictable, boring, heavy, cumbersome, that when Uranus comes around, somebody wants to break free of that. So by asking the client, where in their life are they feeling heavy, restricted, bored, restless, we can get an idea of what Uranus will do. And of course, it will tell us where it's going to be in the chart, in the sign, and what it's aspecting, of course. But it's always very useful to find out from the person what a Uranus transit might mean, because clients want different things from us. Now, that's the key thing to remember, of course. An idea of settling down may not be the best thing for us, but for a client, a Saturn transit or a sense of permanency in the life might be exactly what they want, even if we might think they want something else. Solar arc directions is a symbolic system. We're looking at moving everything forward, the whole chart, the house cusps, whichever house system you use, the angles, the planets, anything else you might use, a day for a year, a degree for every year. So generally speaking, somebody who's 60, everything in the chart has moved forward approximately 60 degrees. So it's the rate of the sun after birth. And what we're looking at with a solar arc chart is we're looking usually at a biwheel, and we're looking at the outer wheel and what the solar arc chart in the outer wheel is doing to the natal chart. I'm going to give you lots of examples, lots of things to consider, and hopefully it'll work and you'll be happy with what we're doing. So we move everything forward. Even retrograde planets move forward at the daily rate of the sun after birth. Now, the only bit of maths you have to do, and I always say to people, if you can count, you can do solar arc. If you can account between any 2 points of the chart, you're looking at the age that they manifest in the life. So if you've got a Moon-Pluto conjunction that's 6 degrees apart, then the age of 6 is when those two planets manifest most most prominently in your life at that given stage. The only bit of maths you have to do is to recognize that over the years, the sun's daily rate, which is about 59 minutes on average, can be a little bit slow in the summer. And I say summer with respect to anybody living below the equator, but really between May and August. So if you've got the sun in Gemini, Cancer, or Leo, around that time, your daily rate is going to be a little bit slower, which means that when you get to the age of 60, the whole chart may not have moved 60 degrees. It's probably going to move about 57, 58 degrees. So the older you get, the more you'll have to consider that. But the computer, of course, will do that for you. So those of you born with the sun in Gemini, Cancer, Leo, you'll find that your chart's a little bit slower than your age. If you're born between November and February, the winter months, Northern Hemisphere, or the summer months, Southern Hemisphere, the chart, the sun moves just over a degree. So a degree in 1 minute. So you get to 30, everything's moved about 30.5 degrees. It's a little bit faster than your age. You get to 60, everything's moved around 61 degrees forward. So I hope that's clear to everybody. Very simple, but the computer will do it all for you. But one of the great things I love about Solar Arc is that you can just look at any 2 points in the chart, count the number of degrees between them, and allowing for the daily rate to change a little bit, we can guesstimate when those planets got together. So approximately 1 degree is 1 year of life, 12 months of life. So half a degree, 30 minutes, is 6 months. 5 minutes is 1 month. We're really talking about the whole chart moving forward, about 1 minute of arc a week. So it's very consistent, very slow. So if you're wanting to know what's going to happen to you next week, I would say make it happen rather than be wanting. That's one thing. But if you're wanting to know the transits you've got next week, or what's happening in your chart next week, you'll have to look at inner planet transits for weekly or daily activity. With Solar Arc, it gives you the keys to what's happening in a year, because I use an orb of half a degree either side. So you've got 6 months or half a degree leading up to the exact hit, and then 6 months, half a degree leading on from that. Solar arcs tend to be pretty accurate in terms of, they tend to be spot on. So often very close to the exact hit, there seems to be an event, a circumstance or situation in the life that appears to reflect that particular solar arc direction. The other point, and I'm moving fast here, and you can always pause me later and listen to it again, but the whole chart moves forward at the same rate, which means that Moon-Pluto conjunction that's 6 degrees apart will always be 6 degrees apart as they move through the zodiac, as they move forward through the zodiac, but they'll always maintain their aspectual or degree relationship. So all natal aspects move together and remain the same distance from each other. So what you'll find, unlike transits and unlike secondary progressions, the consistency means that if you have a very tight aspect in your natal chart, maybe you've got a Moon-Uranus conjunction that's under a degree. When that conjunction solar arc directs to a particular point in your chart, it'll be an important year because both planets are hitting whatever point it is, whatever planet it is, at the same time, roughly. Or that Moon-Uranus in your 11th house, for instance, the midheaven will come along and hit that point at a particular age, and it will hit both points. So you get what Stephen Arroyo used to call double whammies. So you'll get particularly tight natal aspects, conjunctions, squares, oppositions. You'll get dramatic years when those tight aspects either direct to a planet or are directed by a planet or point in the chart. So I hope that's all clear. If any of you have got any questions so far, feel welcome to type those in. I'm going to move forward. So it's actually a lot simpler maybe even than I'm making it at the moment. I'll show you lots of examples as we go through. So use half a degree orb, 6 months either side when we're timing an event. Remember that when I'm talking about astrological events rather than life events, think about major turning points in our lives. Think about the breakdown of a relationship, for instance. We might think, oh, okay, that was when Uranus hit the descendant, or Uranus squared the moon, or Pluto opposed Venus. But we don't know, unless we talk to the client, really when that started. They might have had absolute understanding that it was wrong before they got married, some 20 years before. The situation might have died 5 years before the divorce. They might still be loving somebody as they get divorced. So in terms of events, they're usually processes, which is what I began with. So when you're looking at somebody's life and you're looking at the transits and the directions in their charts, all we can say is that the peak timing, we may not be able to absolutely pinpoint the event or the breakdown of a situation or the closure of a business, but we can really pinpoint the feelings, the process that that person's going through at that particular time. And I see many clients who, when you look at their chart, they might have split up or left their work at a particular date, but looking at the chart, really that split or that detachment happened some months or years before. So again, move away from the idea of trying to predict events. You'll do your best work describing the times, the seasons to your client instead. Other considerations: use conjunctions, squares, and oppositions before any other aspect. They just talk more clearly and more loudly than any other. You can use trines, anything that you know how to articulate to a client, use. That's the key. If you're very good at articulating the dark moon, Lilith, Chiron, the nodes, use it. Use it. And if you're particularly good at the quincunx and you really understand that for a client, put that on board, use that. But in terms of the most dramatic or eventful times, you'll find that they are when planets by solar arc and by transit conjunct, square, and oppose each other. There was something else I was going to say about that. I'll come back to it. I'm sure there's lots of other things I'll say along the way. Yeah, so prioritize conjunctions, squares, and oppositions, but use anything else that you want to. They will tend to be the most important. Remember that solar arcs take 360 years to come round to their natal position. So most of the solar arcs that you have, unless you're dealing with a semi-sextile or a semi-square, they won't happen again in your lifetime. So they're one-off events. And that's key to remembering how important they are. And sometimes you'll have a year where nothing's happening, and then you'll have another year, a few years later, where you're having 4 or 5 major solar arcs by conjunction, square, or opposition. And that will tell you what an important year that's going to be. Also, I do a thing called shadow transits. I'll introduce this as we're talking a little bit later, and you might run off screaming in a moment when I tell you this, but basically I look at directions to the natal chart, but I also look at transits, not only to the natal chart, but to the solar arc directed position as well. Excuse me. And what that does is that links what's happening now with what happened 5, 10, 20 years ago. I'll hopefully have a really good example to show you later with one of your own examples. But if that feels like too much to take on board at the moment, skip it, come back to it later when you feel comfortable with this process of solar arc. It is a great rectification tool because nothing moves back and forward 5 times like Pluto might when it transits. Directions just hit once and they never go back and forth. They just head in one direction. There are some people that use converse directions. I think just because they're Uranian and they like to do everything slightly different from the rest of us. Obviously, if you're doing converse directions, meaning backwards, point A, instead of hitting point B will be hitting point A. That's all. That's really the difference. But people do converse transits and progressions for all sorts of reasons. The other thing to say is that, oh, and I noticed my Virgo moon has noticed there's no full stop afterwards. I shall be screaming all the way back home. Aspects in your grid are early life experiences. Let me show you. Here we go. So, for example, just look at your chart grid when you print out your aspect grid. You print out along with your chart. All the aspects there you can see, for example, Venus is conjunct Neptune here at 6.5 degrees. You'll notice that at the age of 6.5, Venus will conjunct Neptune at that age. This chart has a lot of very tight aspects, 0, 0, 0. So very early on, within the first year of this person's life, they're going to have many solar arcs perfect. But one of the things I look at is, particularly when I'm teaching students this, I say, look at your aspect grid. These are all, if you're using an 8-degree orb for your major aspects, these are all your early solar arcs, your early life experiences and events up until the age of 8. Now, you might have a moon conjunction Neptune. It might be 5 degrees. You live with that degree. Sorry, you live with that aspect all your life, of course, moon conjunct Neptune. But if the client really can't put their finger on it, which is often the case when we're trying to describe Neptune, they can't put their finger on moon Neptune in their lives. Take them back to the age of 5, when those two planets solar arc directed. It could be that moon comes to Neptune or Neptune comes to the moon, doesn't matter. But it'll be indicative of an event, if they remember it, that would be pertinent to understanding and taking on board a moon Neptune experience in their lives, or something that they carried from an early age. And you can do this even if planets seem out of orb. A client recently, she had moon very widely conjunct Neptune. It was about 11, 12 degrees, and it's not something you'd see in an aspect grid. But we spoke about, she was articulating the moon Neptune experience in her life, and how she'd often felt compelled to rescue, to connect to people, to marry or get into jobs that required her coming to the rescue, or feeling drained by what you might call psychic vampires. And I said to her, what happened at the age of 11? And she said, my mum was diagnosed with cancer, and I spent the next year putting everything on hold and just doing everything I could to rescue her. So we're often going to hear a story, even if the degree is out of orb, like 11 or 12 degrees out of orb. If we can get the client back to that, we can help them understand particular issues in their lives, and take them back to a year when that was maybe formulated or made concrete in some sort of way. Okay, a few other considerations before I move on. There are 4 key stages that you're going to be looking at with solar arc, and nothing else. That's the great thing. I like to keep it simple. When a planet gets to 0 degrees of a sign by solar arc, it spends a whole year there. That's going to be an important year in your life and that planet's discovery and your use of that planet. I'll explain more in a minute. When a planet gets to 29 degrees of a sign, the critical degree, it's also going to be an important 12 months as it journeys through that final degree of a sign. I'll explain more in a minute. When a planet moves into a new house, it's going to be important as well, but you need to decide which house system you're using, and you need to have an accurate birth time for that as well, because the angles and the house cusps are all linked to the birth moment. So that needs to be accurate. The fourth thing we want to do is, as I've mentioned already, in a bi-wheel, to look at when a planet by solar arc direction aspects a natal planet or angle, particularly by conjunction. So you look at the outer wheel and it's about to conjunct the solar arc directed Uranus. It's about to conjunct your moon, your natal moon, and that's the fourth consideration. So that's all we need to consider. When a planet's at 0 degrees for the whole 12 months, when a planet's at 29 degrees for the whole 12 months, when it moves into a new house of the natal chart, or when it aspects a natal planet or angle. I may mention something a little bit later when a planet directs to the middle of a sign. I've started doing more work on that as well. So I look at 0 degrees, 29 degrees. I also look at 14.5 to about 15.5 degrees of a sign as well. So they're the only 4 things that you need to look at with solar arcs. So, okay. Let's take a look at a few examples. If you've seen me talk about solar arcs before, you've seen some of these examples. Easy to show, people that you might know or know of. So forgive me if you've seen these already. When a planet gets to 0 degrees, there's a major transition. Often, if you're over 30, that planet's been in the previous sign for 30 years. If you're only 10 years old, of course, it's only been there from your birth. But when a planet gets to 0 degrees, and you can see this in the chart of Pamela Anderson, her sun moved into Leo at a particular time in her life, around the age of 21. And it's going to spend 30 years in Leo. But that first degree is going to give you what you might call an operatic overture of what's coming up. So there's a new script. The planet moved from Cancer, cardinal water, to Leo, fixed fire. Very different energy. Now, if you use classical methods, you'll be keen to know that the sun is going to be moving maybe from its fall or detriment to a sign of rulership, and take on board whatever you learn, whatever you know, to give a good full description of that. So that first 12 months, you're swamped by images of that placement. You get a really good idea of what the next 30 years are going to be like, all rolled up into 12 months. So it's an important time. The other thing to know is that it speaks to every planet or point in that sign as soon as it enters it. You can see that Pamela Anderson, when her sun moves into Leo, for some of us, we don't have any planets in Leo. For her, she's got Jupiter and Venus and the IC. You'll notice this is an equal house chart. So those of you in America, please don't send me death threats. Don't send me letter bombs or hate mail. But this is, I'll explain a little bit why I use I use some equal houses a bit later on. With Pamela Anderson, when the sun moves into Leo, it speaks to Jupiter, to Venus, and to the IC. Even though it's going to take another 7 years before it gets to Jupiter, 19 or 23 years before it gets to Venus. But as it steps into Leo, it's basically saying, what do I know already about Leo? What's going to come alive? Particularly if we're looking at the sun as it solar arc directs is a huge spotlight in our lives. The moon, when it solar arc directs, connects us to an area, builds an emotional bridge of some kind. When a planet gets to 29 degrees, the very final degree, or what we call the 30th degree of a sign, so 29 degrees and 0 minutes, all the way up to 29 degrees and 59 minutes, we have to face during that year some of the most challenging areas or aspects of that sign. It's as though we're being tested before we move into the new sign. Sometimes we feel like we're poised for change, but we're still in the dark. We're waiting for the next chapter of our lives. So say the moon is moving from Taurus into Gemini, it's anticipating that move, but it's still got lots to deal with in that final year. There's a need to finish things off, and often it's a time of mastery. More often than not, though, it's a time of crisis, and the 29 degrees is a crisis degree. in each of the signs. It doesn't mean something terrible is going to happen, but what it does mean is that you're forced to look at how much work you've done learning about that sign in that planet in that particular sign. And it tends to have a bit of a sting in the tail. I have a client recently who got divorced, and her Venus moved to the final degree of Taurus. And her husband, who never really worked, and this is part of the reason why she divorced him, he never really worked, never really paid for anything. He demanded half of her money, and she had to give it to him as well, legally, because of the divorce. So she was very frustrated, and she had to lose quite a bit of what she considered luxuries, Venus luxuries in her life. And she had to let go, which is a tough thing for Venus as it moves towards the end of Taurus. So think of it as a progression of some kind, or in this case, a direction of some kind, moving into a new sign or leaving an old sign and having to deal with stuff you haven't quite finished. But it can, as I say, be a time of mastery. Now, the example here with Pamela Anderson, this is when she got discovered as a model, became a Playboy model. She became a centerfold. And the sun has moved into Leo, which is a great example to be a centerfold. But luckily, not all of us, when our sun moves into Leo, do we pose for Playboy. And most of us can be thankful for that. When the sun moved into Leo for her, she's got Venus and Jupiter and the IC already in Leo. So it says something about highlighting or spotlighting for the sun what she had in Leo. And certainly Venus and Jupiter in Leo could talk about the sex symbol, the glamour puss, the sex kitten, all those different things we might think of with Venus or Jupiter in Leo. So when the sun moved into Leo for her, she got spotted, she got noticed, and she started to develop as a model, and later became an actress with that. Those of you who have seen this example, you'll notice, of course, that the moon here is at 18 Taurus. 3 years later, it opposes Neptune. And we might expect that to be a time when maybe her mother needs help, or whether she's yearning for a home by the sea, moon Neptune. She's in a relationship, the opposition, that speaks of rescuing, trying to look after somebody who might be drug dependent, etc. All sorts of possibilities. But for her, 3 years after her discovery, she signed on to do Baywatch. And the great thing about actors and models turned actors is that they tend to live their charts through the roles they play. So I love the fact that at the time that the moon opposed Neptune in the chart, she ended up being a lifeguard, rescuing people from the sea. Of course, in slow motion, in a red bikini, very moon in Aries in a way, fast and dynamic and crazy show in Baywatch. But I just love how that comes across with the moon Neptune. You can also see that Neptune is heading towards the descendant. And of course, that was the sex tape and the scandal of her relationship with Tommy Lee, etc. So the things that you do when you don't know what's coming up, I guess. Anyway, we'll move on, but keep in mind that 0 degrees and 29 degrees are very important years for any planet. And there are some years you'll get 2 or 3 make that shift, and other times you'll have to wait a number of years for a planet to get to those important degrees. I'm going to move on. Another example here, Bill Clinton. This is when he got sworn in as president. Again, it's an equal house chart, doesn't make much difference because he's born with Libra rising when the angles are very 90 degrees, very close. When we think of elections, we think of a popularity contest. So we're always looking for Venus. We're looking for the most attractive candidate, that's often who they vote for, and also the most popular in some way, the person of the people. So Venus and the moon often figure in the charts of people who win elections of some kind. In his chart, the moment he got sworn in, a couple of months after the election win, the sun was at 11 degrees, just 4 minutes away from a conjunction to Venus, which rules his ascendant. So he had a sun, solar arc sun to Venus. Venus was at 26 by solar arc direction, 26 Scorpio, square his sun. The moon was coming to the 10th house, just a minute away, and half a degree, half a year later, would cross the midheaven. And the descendant had come from all the way from 5 Aries to 20 Taurus, hitting the moon at that point. And what we do know, apart from it being a popularity contest, what we do know is that when you start something like becoming president of the USA, or starting a new business, starting a new relationship, the transits and the directions that you have at that moment define that term of presidency, or define that relationship. You meet somebody under a Uranus transit or direction, believe me, the relationship is going to be very Uranian. Same with Pluto, same with Saturn. Now we know that his chart was very, very Venusian and very lunar at the time of him becoming president. And of course, we know him as the popular MTV president, the very hip president, young, attractive, interested in women, very much so, spent a lot of time being interested in women. Healthcare, putting women in the cabinet, putting them in the Oval Office and under the Oval Office table. So his whole presidency was defined by very Venusian and lunar situations. What you notice often is that the midheaven comes to the sun at times of the most famous moment of somebody's life, or a time, if it's too young, it's a time when something happens with the father or the family that changes the course of your direction. But if you're a leader, you're often looking at the midheaven coming to the sun as your crowning moment. You'll notice, though, that it's 5 degrees off. So it's unusual that his most defining moment wasn't becoming president. It wasn't the peak or the most famous moment. Of course, you can guess what will be. So let's take a look. Some 5 years later, the midheaven reaches the sun by solar arc direction. And of course, that January of 1998, the Monica Lewinsky scandal comes. And of course, that's his most famous moment. Sadly, it's his most famous moment. And people who liked him felt that that was a great waste of his talent. But maybe it wasn't a great waste of his talent, because he obviously had talents in all sorts of areas. Anyway, the midheaven coming to the sun, also we can see that the midheaven here is closely square the ascendant, Mars, and Neptune. And that can talk about perhaps the serial adultery that was present in his life, and certainly his inability to say no, or perhaps certain level of Neptunian cloudiness when it came to his sexual desire or his sexual actions. Obviously a very charismatic position. So wherever the midheaven moves, that very tight square from the midheaven to the ascendant, Mars, and Neptune is going to move too. And we can see that the midheaven reaches the sun. Unfortunately, what could be a crowning moment, the ascendant, Mars, and Neptune are all at 25, 26, squaring that sun as well. So this is what I was saying earlier about very tight aspects. When they hit a particular point, it's going to be a very dramatic year at that time. Very full on. Okay. When we look at JFK, we notice that when the sun reached his 10th house, he became president. When it reached his midheaven, he was shot in Dallas. We've got a 3 p.m. time for him. It could be off by a minute or two, but that's roughly the state of affairs, really. This is his chart many years after his death. It's calculated for the moment that his wife, Jackie, died of cancer in May 1994. And it proves to us that the chart lives on. It proves to us that you can always look at other people's charts to look at your own future. to look at your own development, because the people that care about you, they'll be the ones that are reacting, or their charts will be the ones that are being activated at that time. Now, even though he died 30 years before and she married twice after he had been assassinated, Kennedy has the descendant reaching Pluto at the time of his wife's death, and Pluto coming to the moon within half a degree as well, and other events as well happening by transit. So the chart lives on. Always interesting to look at the charts of people whose life events we know, particularly if we know something about them personally, or we've got a good biography in front of us. All right. What I was saying earlier about the shadow transit. Okay, for example, at 29.5, we have a Saturn return. When transiting Saturn comes back to natal Saturn. I'm hoping you can see my cursor. You may not be able to see it, but I'm actually circling all these things as I'm talking. Some 2.5, 3 years later, Saturn continues to transit through Scorpio and into Sagittarius, and finally catches up with solar arc Saturn. Now that's the shadow transit I was talking about. I'll look at an example in a moment, hopefully from the group. But it's not the transit to the natal chart, it's the transit to the solar arc chart. And this is what I call the shadow Saturn return. And I found that over the years that clients would say, you know what, I'm 32, the Saturn return happened 3 years ago, you described it for me, it's now coming out again. And the shadow transit gives you a second chance to connect with events from the previous transit to natal. In this case, 3 years earlier, roughly 3 years earlier. So the shadow transit's really, really interesting. And I remember when I first started writing about this, and I called it a shadow transit. There were people on I think it was a Noel Till forum, were up in arms about this because Noel said you can never combine transits and directions. But I wrote a piece for him, and some of the astrologers using it start to realize how they connect something that's happening now with an event some years before. So maybe we'll have an example of that as we see. Okay, I'm going to now look at. I'm going to move forward and look at some of the charts. Now, 7 people sent me their chart. I think the first person to do that was Shannon. Shannon, if you're still there, can you let me know that you're here and that you're willing for us to have a look at your chart? You just type. Are you okay? Great, thank you. Okay, all right. Or you can feel welcome to type in anything as I'm moving ahead. If we look at Shannon's natal chart, again, it's an equal house chart. I'm begging the AstroGold people to put the IC in so we can see the IC. The IC, Melanie Meinhardt used to call it the I don't see, and it's certainly that case when we're looking at some programs that don't show it. Now, if Shannon's chart is correct and it's been timed, even if it's on the birth certificate, it could be 5 minutes late by the time people wash their hands, etc. We should notice that around the age of 4, 3.5, 4, Pluto will reach the IC, which is 10 degrees of Virgo. Here's the midheaven at 10 Pisces. So we should notice, this is where you can rectify the chart, we should notice around the age of 3.5, Pluto reached the IC. And the IC, again, which you can't see here, took about 7 years to reach Mars as well. So we should hear events, or if not memories, other people's recollections of things happening in her life around that time, around the age of 3.5 and around the age of 7, that speak a very Pluto experience or a very Mars experience. We can also see that Venus in the natal chart is 8 degrees away from the ascendant. So again, well, 8 years old, she's not maybe going to get married or fall in love, but 8 years old, her love of reading, her love of fantasy, being interested in people, very Venus in Gemini, is going to reach the ascendant at this point. So it might be that she fell in love with a favorite author at that point. It might be that she fell in love with reading or writing. that sort of thing. Also, the ascendant here is 1 degree Cancer. It's 16 degrees away from that Mercury. And so roughly around the age of 16, the ascendant will reach Mercury. So we expect to hear of a ascendant to Mercury type of experience around the age of 16. So as we're talking about this, as I'm doing a bi-wheel in a moment, Shannon, if there's anything that you want to share or can remember that you're willing to share with us, feel very welcome to do that. You may not automatically remember things, but
actually,
it will help.
there's
Sorry?
a lot. Actually,
Okay.
there kind of is. Do you want me to do that now or later?
Is that you, Shannon?
Yes, it is. I unmuted myself.
Hi. Well, Phil, is there anything that you'd like to share for a moment that about any of those solar arcs?
Well, when I was 3.5, we moved to the house that I would grow up in.
Okay. Can you tell us a bit about that?
All of my other brothers, I'm the youngest of 6, and they all traveled around the country because my dad was in the Navy. And so we moved into this house, and this would be my the house that I grew up in more than anyone else, you know, in a stable place.
Okay.
At 7 years old is when I had my first hip surgery.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Mars being a cutter, right? Cutting through things.
Yes. Did that make you extra resourceful? Did you feel more? Yeah, because I imagine Mars in Virgo wants to do something with its energy, wants to be practical, useful. Having a situation like that at such an early age, I imagine you learn how to help yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was in a body cast for several months.
Wow.
So I had to learn to entertain myself and to pretty much I spent a lot of my time outside of my body.
Okay. Okay.
At 16, my mom kind of went through a little phase and was mad at something I did and made me an unwanted boarder in the house and refused to look at me or talk to me or acknowledge that I was there. So that was significant.
Wow. That's 16, did you say?
Yes. So
wow.
Cancer to Mercury.
It's interesting that because when I was looking at this earlier, just briefly, I thought that'd be a great, if that was coming up, I'd say that's a great time to write a diary, to connect, to talk to your mum, to do. But it's interesting that she ended up being the moody one and refusing to talk to you.
Correct.
Wow, wow. I wonder as well whether that set up an experience where you've really bent over backwards trying to connect to people, trying to understand their motives, and really almost like, I need you to talk to me. Has that been an issue?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, even at the age of 16, when we're apparently a little bit more grown up, it's amazing how things like that impact us. The ascendant, descendant is like the surroundings, our horizon. And when it moves, it's like the environment or the surroundings, the horizon moves to a new planet, to a new feeling. So in a way, in some ways, it must have been quite devastating to have that.
Oh, it was horrible. Absolutely. And my father supported my mom and not me.
Okay. All right. So, okay. And what's interesting is a year later, and I'm moving this forward a year, Mercury hits the sun. So there's some sort of clarity naming your identity at that point. It's like either you meet somebody who does that for you, or in some way you think, okay, this is what I want to be. Do you remember that happening at 18?
That's when I moved out of the house and into my first apartment. And it was right around that time that I decided to marry a super stable conservative guy who had been in my life since I was 14.
Wow. Okay. Okay. That's interesting. And then 2 years on from that, we can see the midheaven reaches the final degree of Pisces, in fact, the final degree of the zodiac. And at the same time, the sun reaches Uranus. So what happened then, if you're happy to share, that may have just turned everything upside down for you?
I became pregnant with my first daughter.
Okay.
And whereas before that, my life was all about whoever I was with. And this was the first thing that was all mine.
Okay. Okay, that's interesting. There's an awakening always with Uranus, and the sun spotlights. Was it something that you felt with Uranus in Leo? I think of creative children. I think of, wow, I can design, create, spur this child on to be different, to think differently from people. Was that your method as a mum?
Absolutely.
Right,
I,
right.
I was going to be a mom different from any other mom, and I knew I was going to have children who were leading edge, forefront children.
Right, right. What's interesting is that 2 years before, where you say you married, and the stability isn't Mercury to the Sun isn't marrying the stable partner. Saturn to the Moon by solar arc is marrying the stable partner. Yeah.
He was stable, but we only stayed together 18 years.
Well, that was quite a lot. I thought you were going to tell me 18 weeks or days. No, no, no. 18 years. That's a major commitment,
Oh,
I
and it
think.
wasn't stable. There were affairs. It wasn't stable.
Right. Okay. But at the time when you married, there was a real Saturn Moon feeling of, okay, this is going to be my anchor.
Yes, and he had a life different from the life I knew. I was
Okay.
just a suburb girl with a very white bread life, and he was going to be a fish and game warden. So so I was going to have a totally different life.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Now we're just going to move fast forward to now, basically, pretty much now, your birthday this year. And where are we at? 2 years ago, the ascendant was directly on Uranus. And now, just recently, in the last 2 months, really, the sun has just moved into Libra. Do you feel there's been a shift in the last couple of months to looking maybe for someone, looking for more balance in your life? How do you feel about that, Shannon?
Well, when I was 13, my right leg had grown an inch and a half longer than my left, and they shortened that one in that year. And this year we come around, and the surgery I had when I was 7, it was time to replace that hip on the left. And when they did that, now my right leg is an inch and a half shorter than the left. And I'm looking at another surgery in the next month where I will have that hip replaced and there will be balance in my legs. So my feeling is that by the time 2020 comes around, I'll have 2 fully functioning hips and legs that are more balanced, and I will be in the best physical, emotional, spiritual place that I've ever been in my life.
Wow. Well, heavens, I can't believe the length of time that you've been living with this. That's just unbelievable. If we go back 2 years, just you may not want to share what was going on, but 2 years ago, Neptune was on the descendant and the ascendant was conjunct Uranus. So it seems to be quite an eventful time.
It was eventful. I moved to an amazing home with expansive views of a waterway. And when I did that, there was a shift in, I'm a body worker. There's a shift in the work that I did and do, and that is continuing. So that was a huge, amazing year. And I knew that by moving from the home I bought at the divorce from my first husband, this was a home for my current husband, who I married in 2011. This was our home, and it was a place that we would co-create from.
Wonderful, wonderful. The other thing, we might look at Neptune and be worried, and people look at Pluto coming to their descendant, etc. Neptune to the descendant, in some ways, is letting go. It's resigning to something, or being able to let go of certain situations or people in your life as well. It's not always what you might read in a textbook of the dissolution of, or disillusion of a relationship, but certainly Neptune getting there on your environment, you're obviously looking for something that was going to give you a lot more peace and tranquility too.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to move on. Thank you so much for sharing that and being
Thank you so much,
open to everything. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Thank you. Now let's have a look. There's Marianne. Now, is Marianne around? If you can.
I am.
Yes, there we go. I think you're here. Are you happy for us to look at your chart, Marianne?
Sure. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. You're very quiet, so you might need to type in for me. Let's take a look at where you are today. Let's take a look. Oops, I just messed that one up. Hang on a minute. I need to learn how to use this properly. Here we are. Okay. There we go. So we're going to look at subsidiary chart, and we'll look at the solar arcs for now. Okay, so Marianne was born at a time when practically everything was in Aquarius, and everyone thinks that was the time of the age of Aquarius, at the beginning of Aquarius. And certainly it makes for an interesting reading when I see somebody born in early 1962. If the birth time is right, we've got an ascendant about a year ago, 9 months ago, was crossing over Neptune. Neptune's in the second house, and it's square to Jupiter. And Neptune also rules the descendant. So something about the environment for Marianne about 9 months ago, about a year ago, hit a point where she needed to try to attempt to clarify what seemed to be quite a hazy situation, or there was an experience where she needed to get more meaning in her life in some way. Is there something that you're happy to share with us about last year, Marianne?
Yes, certainly. I think about 2 years ago we moved house, and that finally gave me the feeling that I could start manifesting work. So it's always been about work. How do I do it? How do I communicate myself? And how? So over the past 9 months, that has been starting to become clear to me, to put things really into practice. So it was all about work.
And when you say put it into practice, how does it? I don't hear Neptune yet. So how is that Neptunian?
Spiritual. If you say the age of Aquarius, I always felt I have this big imprint for the new age, and to communicate that and to teach that and to, so if that's the Neptunian, it's always the divine and things like that.
Right, thank you. What we can see as well is that very close Sun-Venus conjunction moved into Aries about 2 years ago. So there was an energy shift about 2 years ago in terms of being more self-directing. It's in the seventh house, so it's like me and my partner, we're together, we're going to pioneer something together. We're moving forward. We're really going to take life by the horns and move forward. What seems to be interesting is that maybe with the Saturn at the final degree of Pisces in the seventh at the moment, there is a tough process of letting go of something or someone that has been a burden in your life, or where you've taken responsibility. And there's a slow letting go this year. You're 7 months into it. There's another 5 months to go. There's a slow letting go of a responsibility that may have drained you. Do you recognize that at all?
Yeah, when I met my new partner around 12 years ago, he got sick. And I started to take care of him. And I've been in this Pisces energy for almost 30 years. And I'm so done with it. I really want to move forward. And we're kind of, so I feel that is happening now. I'm letting go of that old responsibility, and I feel more free and more energized than over the past 20 years, maybe.
Right.
So,
I think the planet's moving into Aries. With Saturn at the end of Pisces, there's something, I would even say in the next 5 months, do some sort of ritual to close the past, particularly with certain women in your life, because Saturn comes from a conjunction innately to Venus. It might be something about a child or family, a fifth house matter, but some sort of ritual to close the door on something might be very useful for you in terms of then conserving energy and really moving forward. A year later from now, a year from now, Saturn will oppose the moon. And there may be a situation with your partner where you need to help construct your partner's work, your partner's living arrangement. It might be the office, it might be something, but it's definitely 7th house, Libra, and opposition feeling to it. And it might be that you provide particular support a year from now with something that the partner is going through at work, or maybe home issues, mother issues, something like that. But just be aware that Saturn will be opposing the moon in a year.
Yeah, that could be my mother-in-law.
Okay.
Probably. That's what you're talking about. Yeah, and my mom died about 2 years ago, 3 years almost. So it's all, yeah.
That would have probably been when the Sun and Venus were 29 Pisces. And that ending in many ways, and that freeing up of energy to some extent. Yes, it may be the mother-in-law, but it may not be what you expect with a mother-in-law. I just mean it might be that his attention is very much on looking after her during that period. So I'd never look at a chart and predict death, or even think a chart could predict death. What it does suggest is a certain responsibility of the partner to his mother. Saturn opposition the moon.
Could be, definitely. Yeah. I mean, she has that age, so things like that could happen. Yeah.
It might be that she moves in, or that the arrangements change a little bit, and there's a sense of responsibility with the partner's mother. Saturn in the 7th, opposite moon in Libra. So again, these are things to look out for, be aware of, etc., rather than be worrying about. Of course, I'd hate you to go away feeling anxious and worrying about that.
No.
Okay. But okay, I'm going to move on to show another few examples. Thank you so much for sharing and speaking as well, Marianne. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right. Let's who else have we got? I'm going to try and do as many as I can. Thank you for still being here. There was a Bill as well. Now, is Bill here? Let's have a look. There's a Bill here. Yes. Bill, are you happy for your chart to be looked at? Okay, he's online, but maybe I've sent him to sleep. That's usually what I do.
Let me see if I can find him to unmute him for you. He may need help unmuting. Bill?
He can
actually self-muted, Bill, so if you can unmute yourself.
Or he can type in if he wishes instead.
That would be fine as well.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll give him a few seconds, and I'll move on. If we can always come back to Bill in a moment if he's there we go. How do I unmute? Good question. Okay. I'll leave you to deal with that, Carol.
Bill, if you look up at your little GoToMeeting where it says mute yourself, you can sometimes hit that little button and that will unmute you. You might also be muted by your speaker system. So there's usually a couple of different ways. Yeah, I still have you down as self-muted.
Okay.
So, Bill, you might just want to type in the chat box.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is if he's happy to go ahead, just type something in the chat box, Bill, to let me know that you're fine with that as we're moving forward. So what I'm doing, I'm looking around the outer wheel, just looking at where the planets are. I usually start around the 1st house. So I'd look at Jupiter here in the 2nd, see that about a year ago it was conjunct Venus. And then I look at anything else that's around 18 or 19 degrees, particularly by conjunction, square, or opposition. So Jupiter here, it's gone past Venus a year ago. I hope that was a nice time. Thing with Jupiter is it promises often more than it delivers. We have to be ready for it. We have to be ready to run with it to make the most of a Jupiter direction or transit. But I hope that was a good period for you, Bill, about a year ago. And now at the moment, Jupiter's coming to conjunct Neptune, the ascendant's at 24. So I look in the center wheel for anything, including the angles at 24, for instance. And then if there isn't, I move on. I'm also aware up here that about just under 2 years ago, the moon moved into Pisces after being 30 years in Aquarius. And what does Bill know about Aquarius? He knows the midheaven, so he's always got a feeling of being a little bit different, perhaps, separate from the crowd, thinking outside the box, not necessarily part of the group. And the North Node amplifies that as well. So the moon was heading through that Aquarian zone for 30 years, and it stepped into Pisces just under 2 years ago for a very different kind of experience. And it might be that Bill has been searching, a good word for the moon in Pisces, searching for work that can be more meaningful for him, even if he's had to leave the group of friends or the group that he knows, the Aquarian group he knows. He stepped out now with that moon, searching, trying to make an emotional connection in his work to do something more meaningful. So that's something that I might want to pursue with him if he were able to reply or to listen or to hear this. Also, we know that in about a year and a half, the midheaven opposes these Saturn in Libra in the 5th house, which means the IC conjunct Saturn in Libra. So that's something to be aware of in about a year and a half. The IC, which started off in Leo, is now in a year and a half coming to hit that Saturn in Libra. And that might be about making a choice to do with the family, relationship pattern. It might be a new environment in that sense with the home, making a move in that way, or taking on a particular family situation or burden. I haven't heard from Bill, so no, he's not typing in as well either. So I hope there was something that you wanted to look at, Bill, rather than me sort of guessing. Okay. Well, if you do find the unmute button or want to type in something, we can look at that chart a little bit more later. Let's have a look at Tina. Now, I saw Tina's name up a little bit earlier. Tina, are you happy for us to look at your chart for a few moments?
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, Tina. Thanks for being here. Thank you. So we're looking at where you are today, pretty much, the 30th of September, and zooming through the chart. If the birth time is right, and I always say if, I hate to make assumptions about the chart until I've tested it a little bit. The ascendant's at the final degree of Gemini. So we could say that 2 years ago, it was opposing Saturn. So the descendant was conjunct Saturn about a year and a half ago, actually. And this year is the year of the final move as the ascendant makes its final move through that 29 degrees of Gemini. Do you feel like it's a transition of really tying up loose ends, Tina, this year?
Yes, it is absolutely a tying up loose ends year.
Yeah, it's going to feel very Gemini, of juggling lots of different people, lots of situations, lots of commitments you'd rather not have. It's also about finishing off paperwork, anything that you're writing, that you're wanting to communicate. Get it all finished in the next 9 months if you can. Get all the paperwork, all the systems sorted, because you'll be moving into the sign of Cancer, which is your IC and your 4th house. So there's going to be a movement in about 9 months from now that says, I'm actually looking for somewhere that's more of a comfort zone, more peace and quiet, more Cancerian, something that nurtures me, that feeds me in a very different way. Are you looking for that at the moment, Tina?
Well, yes, I am looking for a little more balance, and I've been working toward that, been working on my inner spiritual life. And so, yeah, I'm looking for more balance and peace and harmony for sure.
Yes, and there's something about getting back to water, to connecting to the past, Cancerian stuff that links to the IC, which is at 15, and the fourth house as well. Going back to your roots, going back to somewhere you may have visited or been living as a child, connecting to an area of life that feels like it's going to nurture you rather than you have to be everybody's midwife. You know, and you've got the moon in Aries, the ascendant in Aries. You're somebody that wants to do everything yesterday, particularly with that Sag energy as well. And I imagine the perfectionist in you really wants to do a great job all of the time, and that can prove exhausting. Maybe exhausting for other people as well, but certainly the drive. When you've got a moon in Aries or an ascendant in Aries, I always say keep active, keep busy. Depression or feeling despondent, that feeling sets in when you're doing nothing, when you haven't got a goal, when you're not trying to do something of a high standard, to a high standard. A year ago, 2 years ago roughly, the midheaven moved to a excuse me, to a mid degree of Pisces. And I mentioned the mid degrees a little bit earlier. The mid degrees of the signs are at a time when the planet directed to so far away from the beginning, you no longer have a reference point, and the end is too far away for you to even anticipate it. So the middle degrees are often times, for example, in the cardinal signs, when we have a planet reach the mid degrees of cardinal signs, we have to deal with conflict, we have to speak up for ourselves, we have to fight for things, because the cardinal signs are linked to pushing things forward and taking things on board and having to take action or fight or stand our ground. When planets by solar arc planets or points reach the mid fixed degrees, we tend to feel bored, we tend to feel stuck, we need to do things to get out of that rut. When planets are in the mid mutable signs, we're usually juggling all sorts of things. The midheaven in the mid degrees of Pisces suggests that about a year and a half ago there could have been a lot of family or friend chaos, drama, stuff that you had to do a lot of juggling with, and to try to sift your way through quite a turbulent emotional environment that could have felt quite chaotic. Can you relate to anything like that a couple of years back that you want to share?
Yes, I have been. It's been fairly tumultuous in my life, which is why I've been consciously trying to meditate, slow things down, be more conscious of my own interactions and my stance within the chaos, so that I can try to go within the chaos that does exist in my life.
Right. And what you can see as well is that transiting Neptune is around the degree of your solar arc midheaven. Yeah. And this is what I call a shadow transit. So I would look back, hang on, I have to grab my ephemeris. I'd link it back to when Neptune was originally on the natal midheaven. And if we go back in time in my ephemeris, that would have been, for example, oh gosh, that's a while away. That's roughly 1991. So that's you as about 32, 33 years old. And Neptune on the midheaven at that point would have been a set of experiences and situations. They've been coming back recently. And there's a definite link between Neptune on the solar arc midheaven, the shadow transit, and back to 1991 when Neptune was on the original midheaven. So you should, whether you want to share it or not, you should be able to see a link between a sense of Neptune MC, feeling of trying to get calm, trying to get clearer in your goals. Do you recognize that link at all?
Well, of course, I'm going to look at how it's affecting relationships. In 1991, I ended a long-term relationship, and right now I'm considering ending a long-term relationship as well.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. There's something about Neptune on the MC, there are certain things you don't want. And your Neptune's in the 7th, so of course it's going to relate to the one-to-one. And what you need is to be inspired rather than dragged down, or to be rescuing, or to be looking after other people. And dare I say it, 2 years ago seemed to be a turning point of maybe exhaustion with Neptune on that Venus. And this last year or so, with transiting Neptune on the solar arc midheaven, your key is survival, wanting to ensure that whatever choice you make, you're not feeling exhausted, sunk, pulled down, wrapped up in other people's drama. And so contemplation, quiet time, Neptunian links to spirituality of some kind that speak to you are going to be very useful at this point. The other thing going on as well, of course, is your solar arc Mars is at 17 Cancer, and of course Pluto is opposing that as well. So there appears to be some level of power struggle going on, and that relates back once again, interestingly, the last time that Pluto was opposing Mars was in 1990, 1991. So you're actually having a double shadow transit of Neptune on the MC and Pluto opposing Mars that link back to that very important time in 1991, roughly. So it's a powerful time. It's a very empowering time. If you're clear about what you need in your life rather than being swamped by other people's needs. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Okay, I'm going to move on. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tina. I hope that's been helpful in some sort of way.
Yes, it has. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to have a quick look. Let's have a look at Bonnie. Is Bonnie around? Is anybody still here? I don't think Bonnie's here anymore, or wasn't. Let's take a look.
Let me check on that for you.
I think she's gone. Yes. There's Anne as well. Anne, are you around? Are you ready and willing?
I'm here.
Hi, Anne. Hi. Thanks for being here. I'm going to have a quick look here. And I know you're a double Scorpio. Are you okay with this intrusion?
Yes, I'm okay.
Great. It's amazing. At the school, I have a lot of Scorpios come as mystery guests. Maybe it's the mystery bit they love, but they really are so open about talking about themselves. Maybe it's my Mercury Pluto that maybe helps a little bit. Who knows? Anyway, so this is where you're at.
Aries, that's fine.
What's that? Sorry, Anne?
Because you're an Aries, that's fine.
Maybe that's it. Yeah. So we've got Saturn 16 degrees away from your MC. So 16 years old should have been a turning point in terms of how you saw your life, in terms of service, in terms of commitment. It might have been a family event at that age, at 16, that almost burdened you with a certain level of service, looking after other people, taking on board. Is that something that you want to share or that you remember?
Yeah, I moved away from home when I was 16, so I actually had to take care of myself and grow up a bit fast and things like this.
Okay. Did that help? Did you change your health, your routine, your lifestyle? Did it have a Virgo feel to it?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Okay. Right now, about a year ago, you had the midheaven reach Venus, which may have been an insight into psychology, into being able to help people. Did something happen last year that that links to your sense of direction in your life and your purpose?
Yeah, well, I started my astrology practice a year ago, full time. So I think that's one thing.
Do you feel that it's been all consuming? Are you attracting very scorpionic situations and people? Are you attracting people that trust you? Is that what's happening at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not afraid of going into deep deep discussions and problems and things like this. So maybe, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Two things are happening in your chart. The ascendant is at the final degree of Sagittarius. So if the birth time is right, this is an important year in a way to fly, to sort of say, okay, I'm always going to be a student. I'm always going to be an eternal student. But as you step into Capricorn, there's a sense of being professional, moving forward, and leaving the perennial student there. The birth time is, if it's out a bit, it might be that it's already moved into Capricorn, because it sounds like you're doing the full-time Capricorn work already. Something that isn't as time related is Pluto. And just under a year from now, Pluto is exactly conjunct your sun. So there is, with Pluto, it can feel non-negotiable. That's the thing with Pluto. It can feel like, oh, well, there's a lot that needs to be changing. It's always a sense of metamorphosis, things coming up. And the final degree of Scorpio is the crisis degree of the crisis sign. So people with, you can go online onto my website, and there's an article all about 0 degrees and 29 degrees. And one of the examples I use is 29 degrees Scorpio, because you've got such an intense level of people who deal with gender issues, sex issues, power issues, control issues. As somebody typed up, Monica, just now, Scorpio is always going to be about depth and authenticity. Absolutely. Always about depth, betrayal, trust, being authentic, being who you truly are. And there's something about next year of shedding one aspect of your life, or shedding your skin in some way, to try to get back to being even more authentic in your life. And it might be that you have a level of intensity with your clients and what they need from you next year as well. But it feels like a watershed moment in your life, with the Pluto coming to the sun. Very good to shed your skin, to begin again in some way, to be reborn. It's going to be a powerful time, I think. Okay. Is there anything that you want to add to that, or feel that? Do you already feel that coming? What is there anything that you'd like to say?
Well, my son is a bit tricky that way too, that it doesn't make many aspects. So the things that usually triggers my son can be very sudden somehow, or they can be, yeah, it might be a bit hard for me to pin them down before they happen.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I recognize that with Pluto, we can get obsessed about things without being able to see it from a distance, being able to have perspective. So it might be that something already that you're quite obsessive about, that you're very focused on, it might be someone or some situation in your life, to get a little bit of breathing space, to get a little bit of air into the chart. Because the chart is very watery, very fiery. There's some earth, but there's practically no air in the chart. So talking about it, writing, expressing it, talking to airtight people might be a very good opportunity in the lead up to this. So it doesn't feel outside of your control. It doesn't feel like it's just emerged from nowhere. So this important solo art direction next year has, you're waiting for it, and you're ready to articulate it and to express it in a way that you haven't done before. So I hope that can make sense, and I hope that can be useful in how you might approach it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Anne. Is there anybody left here? I think, did we? No, we didn't do Sally. Is Sally around? Let's have a look.
Yes,
Sally.
I'm here.
Hi, Sally. I think you're the last one, because I haven't heard from anybody else. Okay, are you happy for us to have a quick look?
I am. Thank you.
Great. Okay. All right. So this is somebody else's chart with you, so we don't want that. Let's get to the wheel to where you are now. Okay. All right. So interesting. Okay, you've got, as you say, you've got a collection of planets in Cancer, around the midheaven, around the 10th house, and a year ago, the moon was on the midheaven. 2 years ago, it moved into the 10th. And 2 years ago, Mercury crossed the ascendant. So there's something about you finding your voice, getting more confident about your voice and who you are a couple of years ago, and really communicating with that. Did you open up a practice? Were you doing something different with your work at that point, Sally?
I did. This was when I retired, and I finally got to do things I love to do, including astrology. And
Okay,
so
good.
I started doing readings for people. I wrote an article for the Mountain Astrologer. So just a lot of things have been happening.
Fantastic, fantastic. I think Mercury coming over the ascendant, the gift of Mercury in Leo can feel quite certain, particularly a square to the moon in Taurus. You know, I always joke that Mercury and Leo people sound, when they tell you something, it sounds like they've just come down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments in their hand.
I love to be dramatic. That's true.
Well, they certainly sound like they know what they're talking about. And when it comes to the ascendant, you're able to inspire other people. You see, Leo isn't the whole thing about the audience and the appreciation of other people. Leo's great role is that of a mentor. So having Mercury in Leo is not only are you able to find your voice and have time for that now, with Mercury crossing the ascendant 2 years ago, it's also a time where you're able to be a mentor for people, to really help them hear your voice. The sun is in the middle of, has been in the middle of Virgo. So about a year ago, there was a lot of stuff to clear up, a lot of stuff to process, and maybe even a health issue to clear up in order for you to move forward. Does that make any sense, if you're happy to mention?
It does. I did a lot of changes to my diet, and that made a big difference in my energy.
Right. Good, perfect. Because if you hadn't tackled that with the Sun and Mars being in the middle of Virgo, you wouldn't have been equipped for this next chapter. And I think that, you know, I wouldn't say you wouldn't have been, but certainly I think you would have not felt as strong as you do now in that way. Venus has just moved into Leo as well, so there is a feeling of just being able to enjoy the life, enjoy the group, enjoy the situation, enjoy expressing yourself in the last 10 months through articles, etc. It has a nice feel to Venus being in Leo. I always joke that a Venus in Leo person, or when it's directing there, they don't want equal rights. They want to be treated far better than their partner. So maybe this is the time to really express that, you know, to say, well, actually, you know, I don't want to be treated as an equal. I'm going to be treated far better.
Right, right. That makes total sense.
Yeah. Okay. The other thing I just want to mention is that when planets cross over the midheaven, they really speak to your sense of where you're going in your life, who you are, how you're going to blossom in society, your reputation, all those things. But when they cross to the equal house 10th, which is known as the zenith, or zenith, it speaks more about the work, the actual job, the change. So a year before, actually, because the midheavens, oddly enough, should be in the 10th here. That's just the way it's been drawn here. But 2 years ago, you leaving the job, the moon moves into the 10th, and then it gets to 8 degrees and crosses over the midheaven. So there's a sort of definition of I want to take care of people in a different way. When a planet hits the IC, it tends to have a far more personal moment. It's a personal time about your roots, where you're coming from, the family, the history. When it crosses over the 4th house, known as the nadir, the 4th house equal cusp, 90 degrees from the ascendant here, it's usually the house rather than the inner workings of the family. It tends to be, oh, I moved house, I did this, I did that with my home, with the actual property. So this is why I use equal houses, because it gives me a midheaven and a 10th house, and it gives me a 4th house and an IC, and I can just play with these in different ways. Anyway,
that
I'm going to
makes sense. Yeah, I'm glad you explained that.
Okay, thank you. No, Yeah. There are all sorts of little tools you pick up along the way, as I'm sure you know as well, with your own work. I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much, Sally, for sharing your experience and your life with us. A little bit of that for a few minutes. Thank you. Feel
Well,
welcome
thank
to.
you. This has been very helpful.
Thank you, Sally. What I say to everybody here, those of you still listening, I hope it's been useful. Check out I'm going to put the camera on, so at least you know it's me. I'm actually here. There we go. Check out Solar Arcs for yourself. Check out your chart through the years, look at particular moments of your life, look at the last couple of years, and they'll start to click. Usually they're very, very easy to see. It's the planet in the sign in the house. It's just, it's astrology in action. So take a look at that. If you like what I do, buy the book. Feel very welcome to. I'm doing a palmistry course next month as well. If you're interested in hand analysis, I'm doing that online. So feel welcome to check out everything. And I hope it's been useful. So thank you for inviting me, and thank you for sitting on board. And over to you, Carol. Thank you.
Frank, thank you so much for that informative and wonderful presentation. And I know you had so many people sending charts. So if your chart was not looked at, again, we were so limited in our time. And Frank, we certainly appreciate you taking that additional half hour to be able to view the members' charts. Thank you again. It was a wonderful presentation. And again, all of you will be receiving a copy of the recording, so you'll be able to review the information. And be sure to check out Frank's website. And again, have a wonderful, wonderful day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you. Thanks, Carol, for being wonderful.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.